Excuse us.
Yeah, right here. Right here. Yeah.
Good morning. As you know, my name is Alan Jackson. This morning, I had to withdraw as Nick Reiner's counsel. Circumstances beyond our control, but more importantly, circumstances beyond Nick's control, have dictated that, sadly, it's made it impossible for us to continue our representation of Nick. I'm legally and I'm ethically prohibited from explaining all the reasons why. I know that's a question on everybody's mind. We expect the public defender to step in. They've already been appointed and very capably protect Nick Reiner's interests as he moves forward through the system. But be clear, be very, very clear about this. My team and I remain deeply, deeply committed to Nick Reiner and to his best interests. In fact, we know, we're not just convinced, we know that the legal process will reveal the true facts of the circumstances surrounding this case, Nick's case. You know, a lot's been printed of late, over the last 3 weeks. A lot has been printed about Nick, printed about his family, printed about the circumstances. Speculation is in print. On December 15th, in the early morning hours, I was in New York at the time, and I got a call. Me and my team, we dropped everything. And for the last 3 weeks, we have devoted literally every waking hour to protecting Nick and his interests. We've investigated this matter top to bottom, back to front. What we've learned, and you can take this to the bank, is that pursuant to the laws of this state, pursuant to the law in California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of murder. Print that. Print that. We wish him the very, very best moving forward. And that's all I have today.
All right, everybody. And that was the wild press conference that went down today after Nick Reiner's appearance in court. And wow, what an appearance it was. Again, there was not live cameras allowed in the courtroom. There's a couple of media sources out there that are playing clips of what they were allowed to produce, but there was not a live feed. The judge did not allow that this time. But what did happen in the courtroom, we're going to be talking today about that, and you just heard it. Jackson is out, and he declared, almost yelling at the top of his lungs, that Nick Reiner is, under the laws of California, not guilty. Not innocent, not didn't do it, but under the laws of California. That's very telling, and we're going to get into why that's very telling and what that really means for Nick Reiner's defense and what's really going on here, because there's a lot of media outlets that are reporting and assuming that this has to do with money. And we all know Alan Jackson doesn't do things for free. He's very costly. If you want someone of his caliber to pay attention to your case and put all of his efforts into the case like he has for the last 3 weeks for Nick Reiner, it's going to cost a lot of money. But that is not why he's out. We are going to talk about why he's out. I'm going to explain it to you. I don't know this for a fact. I don't have any special connections to Alan Jackson or to the case, but I figured it out based on what he said and based on what we know and based on the events and the timeline of things that have happened thus far in this case. So without further ado, of course, you can go on and read all about this. I have the exclusive analysis, links to the cases that we're going to talk about, and explaining exactly what happened here on the website, www.justiceisaprocess.com. And of course, it will be linked in the description to this video. So make sure you get over there to the website, check it out, and get this website saved, because this is where everything happens. It's where we release our daily desk posts, justice breakdowns, background reports on the cases we're covering, and anything you need to know about the cases. And we keep a library of links to all of our YouTube coverage that we do for our cases. So it's the place you need to go if you want an organized way to keep track of everything we are doing. And all of our desk posts are organized in a nice archive there as well. With that said, let's jump into this and talk about what is going on here with the Nick Reiner case. All right, guys, so here we are. What is happening here in this case? Alan Jackson has exited the case. We had a hearing. The arraignment was pushed, so we will get that out of the way as well. That's another piece. The arraignment was pushed yet again due to this development of Alan Jackson leaving the case. Now, again, it's important to begin to understand what's happening here. You must follow what he said. Alan Jackson spoke in code today to tell people, and those that would understand or have an ability to understand exactly what was going on here. The exact words Alan Jackson uses: pursuant to the law of California, Nick Reiner is not guilty of red rum. Print that. You heard those dramatic words that we started out with. And again, it's important to understand he didn't proclaim him innocent. He didn't say he didn't do it. He just said under California law, Nick Reiner is not guilty of red rum. A massive distinction, and it tells us everything we need to understand. Now, what did happen here is the case is now in the hands of the public defender's office, which he said he believed was very capable of handling this defense. And on top of that, the arraignment is now scheduled for February 23rd or 23rd. So here's what's going on here. Judge in the courtroom, and if you go back and you can watch it, now we don't have, and again, I don't have usable footage right now of what happened inside that courtroom. But what was said, what I observed from the footage that's available and reported in the news reports, is he said he had no choice but to step down. And he said that in his own words in that news conference, because there were circumstances beyond our control and, more importantly, beyond Nick's control. Now, beyond Nick's control, what does that mean? Many are saying that that means that there's a money issue, that Nick Reiner has a money problem, that his relatives have cut off the flow of money. And he also explained he's ethically obligated and prohibited from explaining why he withdrew. That attorney-client privilege, it attaches to that reason. But that is not what's going on. That's what the media is telling you right now. That's what a lot of people are saying in all the comments, all of the stuff out there. But that is not what's happening right now. There is the theory of the money falls apart because there's a couple things you need to understand about that. Number one, once an attorney's in, especially in a capital case, a judge is not going to let that attorney just leave because they say, well, now today they can't pay me money. 3 weeks ago they were paying me money. We had an agreement, and now they're not going to pay me. That's not going to happen. The judge is not going to let him out for money. So in very rare cases would that ever occur or happen. But there is a way and there is a reason why he has to get out of the case. And we're going to talk about that right there. And it rests in the framework of a United States Supreme Court that was decided back in 2018 that's going to tell us exactly why Alan Jackson is now out of this case. Now, also in the New York Times, they reported that a source close to the New York Times reported that Alan Jackson's performance, that had nothing to do with Alan Jackson's performance, that he was a pro, that he'd done a great job, that he, wanted to continue this, but that the things that happened that would not allow him to. So, what is this case that I'm talking about? It's 2018 case, McCoy versus Louisiana, and the case established something fundamental about a defendant's right to have input into their defense. The defendant, the Supreme Court held in that case that the defendant has a constitutional right to choose the objective of their defense, even if their attorney thinks it's a terrible idea. In other words, the attorney is not the architect of the defense. The attorney does not get to decide what the defense is. The attorney gets to assist the defendant, propose to the defendant, but ultimately what goes in front of the jury and the way the defense is conducted is decided by the defendant, not the attorney. In that case, he was charged with red rumming 3 family members. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His attorney, Larry English, concluded that it was a death penalty case and concluded that the best approach to this case was to concede his guilt and argue for mercy. and that would save his life. In his opinion, it was about saving his defendant's life and not about, not about trying to try this case and assert his innocence. McCoy said, no, it's not true. I'm innocent. And I'm being set up by a corrupt police department. The defense attorney ignores this, goes to trial, puts in front of the jury, and tells the jury he did it. He did it. But have mercy on him. Give him mercy, please. And ultimately, it backfires on the defense attorney because they end up convicting him and they end up sentencing him to death anyways. Now, the Supreme Court reverses this, and Justice Ginsburg writes in that decision that there are certain decisions that belong to the defendant alone, and that includes whether to maintain their innocence or concede guilt. Okay, and that you cannot take that if the defense is going to concede guilt, the defense attorney has no right to concede a defendant's guilt for them, and that is a distinction. There's other strategic things they can do. There's strategies they can do. They're allowed to do that. They're an experienced defense attorney. The one thing they cannot encroach upon is telling the jury that their client is guilty, or having conceding that in front of the jury. An attorney cannot override basically held that they cannot override a client's fundamental choice about the objective of their defense. That's the language that was used. Now the decision is right here. If you go to the website, as I mentioned, you can actually go right to the decision and read this decision for yourself. If you're someone who wants to do it, who likes to get into case law, go in and read this case. Once you read this case, you understand exactly what's happening here as we piece this together. That's the first piece you need to understand. Now, a year after this case, because what's established in this case is now what's called precedent, right? And precedent is simply a past ruling now affects all future rulings. So here's what happens. Ninth Circuit applies McCoy to an insanity defense in United States versus Reed. Not Karen Reed. It's interesting that Reed is involved in a case dealing with Alan Jackson. But United States versus Reed. That is Jonathan Reed. And he stabbed his cellmate 13 times. But he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. His attorney wants to present an insanity defense. Now, Reed refuses. He insists instead that he was possessed by a demon, okay? And this case is wild. If you get into this case and you read it and you go do the research on this case, it's a pretty wild case. He ends up trying to go pro se. He wants to put on a defense that he was possessed by a demon. And he still wants to call, though, the doctor who's going to say that by definition, under the definition, California follows the McNaughton rule. Under that rule, he says, nope, you're not. The doctor was going to say that he did not understand what he did was wrong at the time that he did it. That he met the legal definition of insanity. But the judge said, well, you can't do that. It doesn't make any sense, because if you're claiming a demon, that has nothing to do with what you're claiming. So the judge was concerned. The judge was concerned about the competency of this individual, because when he first came before, he actually ends up going right where Nick Reiner is at right now. He goes to the same facility, the Twin Towers facilities, and he's declared incompetent to stand trial. He's then sent to Patton State, where they essentially bring him back to be able, get him able to be competent enough to stand trial. But the judge says he's not competent enough to handle his defense. So the judge reappoints his attorney, who then asserts this defense for him. And in that case, under United States versus Reed, they reverse the case because they say that no, they did not have a right to force the insanity defense, because the insanity defense is tantamount to essentially conceding guilt, because in order to assert the insanity defense, you must concede guilt. So as a result, the case got reversed. And that is essentially what was happening here, in the sense that if you listen to what Alan Jackson said, Alan Jackson is saying that he did a thorough investigation, up, down, backwards, forwards, and that he has concluded legally, under California law, Nick Reiner is not guilty. Not innocent, not didn't do it. Not guilty. The only way someone would be legally not guilty, okay, would be if he's referring to, which we already know is present, we already know from reports from TMZ that it was that he had been diagnosed as a schizophrenic with schizoaffective disorder weeks before the deaths of his parents. That he'd had his medications adjusted effectively, had eventually gone off his meds, had moved in with his parents because they wanted to keep track of him. So we know there were 10 in court today. There was a reference to sealing 10 subpoenas from people that they were intending to call as part of their defense. And they asked those to be sealed until the public defender's office could get their hands around everything, which the judge did. And he had spent all this time investigating this case, okay? As he mentioned, they spent the last few weeks dropping everything and investigating the case. And to his conclusion, he was not guilty according to the laws of California, okay? So that tells you exactly what's going on here. And unfortunately, what occurred, I believe, is that Nick Reiner said, I don't want to assert that. I want to either maybe plead guilty or assert his innocence. Now, if that happens, okay, the only thing that Alan Jackson can do because under McCoy and Reed, it's now established precedent. He cannot force the insanity defense on his client. And he has ethical obligations because he cannot present a defense that he believes to be fraudulent. In other words, he can't go to the court now because through his own investigation, he has determined that his client is guilty. It appears that what he would be wanting, now if this was a guilty plea, he could have walked him through that. It appears that Nick Reiner wants to go forward with a I didn't do it defense, while Alan Jackson says, no, you're legally insane, and we want to pursue an insanity defense. That is the only thing in this case that makes sense. And he believes it will fail. He's not going to pursue a strategy that he knows will fail, that he knows is not going to work, especially when a viable alternative exists. The only thing he can do in that moment, in that situation, to make sure that he's acting ethically and acting under the requirements that he's required to maintain his good status with the bar, is to withdraw from the case, which is what he did today and why he went in chambers, have a discussion regarding the situation with the judge, and then he was granted withdrawal. And again, he tells us this. He spoke in a certain way. Circumstances beyond Nick's control, because if Nick's mental illness is preventing him from accepting the defense that would save his life, that is literally beyond his control, because potentially you have a situation where Nick may not remember. He may not be willing to accept yet that what he did, even though the evidence is overwhelming that he did do this, even though the evidence is overwhelming that he's got mental problems, he's got things going on. And as a result, the only option that Alan Jackson would have is to step out of the case and let someone else come in. Now, what the public defender's office is going to do with this case, what's going to happen on the 23rd, whether or not Nick Reiner will again be potentially deemed incompetent to stand trial, we will find all that out on the 23rd, or maybe we won't. I don't know. Maybe there'll be yet another continuance. But right now, the public defender in charge of the case, at least according to court today, is Kimberly Green. She's taken over. She has not had the chance to talk. She said she only had about 30 seconds of time to talk. Now, the DA came out after Alan Jackson spoke, and he issued a statement expressing complete confidence that he's going to convict Nick Reiner if this goes to trial or however this plays out. But, look, this is a much more complicated case right now, because what we have in our hands is we have a defendant potentially who is refusing to go forward with a defense that could help him avoid the death penalty. And in his mind, I think there's one or two thought processes going on in Nick Reiner's mind. Either maybe there's some long shot that somehow he's innocent. I don't think, I don't know. I can't conclude that. Right now, he's presumed innocent under the law. Or he has the idea in his mind that he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life in either a facility or a prison. So he figures the death penalty is the way to go. At least it's a way out. Not exactly what what anybody agrees with, but it's what makes sense potentially under these circumstances with what's going on here. But this is what's happening here. I believe not money, not a lack of funds. I think his siblings were willing to pay for this because they don't believe in the death penalty. I don't think he wants to go sit in a mental institution for the rest of his life. I don't think he wants to go sit in a prison for the rest of his life. I don't think he wants to sit. This is a kid that, when he's not on substances, when he's not on things, has lived in the absolute opulence and the trappings of life like no one else. And now he's got to sit with what he did. He's got to sit with the consequences of what he did. And quite frankly, I don't think he wants to. I think that's just the end result of it all. I don't think he wants to. So tell me your thoughts. What do you think? Do you think that it's money? Do you think, read through these cases, read through this article that I wrote, review what we've talked about here today, and tell me, do you think that's what it is? If you know anybody, if it's somebody you know that's close to the case, or anybody has any information, please put it in the comments. You can comment on this on the website. If you come all the way down here, I'll show you right here. Leave me a comment. It goes directly to me. It's less public. So if there's any information you need to send my way, you can submit a comment right here on the website, right inside this article. I will see it. I approve whether it goes up or not. But if you've got information, I would love to know, because this is what I believe is going on here. And I think that it's going to only, like I said, it's going to get interesting. But it's a very, very sad case nonetheless. And it's a sad set of circumstances for this family to have to be going through this. And of course, they're having to go through this at such a public level. But we'll see what happens here now that the case is in the hands of the public defender's office, and what they do, and what happens at the arraignment on the 23rd of February. Until we get there, guys, in due process we trust. We have to let this play out. We have to ensure that it's a fair process. That's what's going on right here. That's what Alan Jackson did today. If he stepped out of the case for the reasons we think, and we hope that the public defenders will continue to ensure that Nick Reiner's rights to a fair trial are protected, that the victim's family's rights to having a fair trial for the family's killer is protected, and that at the end of the day we get a fair process that renders a fair verdict and a fair outcome. That's what we're looking for. So with that said, guys, in due process we trust, and until we meet again, guys, let justice prevail.
System's rigged, man, it's time to break free. Eyes wide open, gotta see what I see. Standing on the front lines, fighting for the truth. Lift the veil of lies, it's time to be the proof. Take a stand, don't you back down. Raise your voice, let's shake the town. We're the voices that won't be ignored. Breaking chains, yeah, we're ready for war. With the power of the people, we'll make them see a world of justice unite.